This is the Defenders podcast on TV Podcast Industries, and we're exploring Marvel's 616, Episode 1, Japanese Spider-Man. Welcome back, fellow Defenders. We're back defending the Marvelverse, and we're looking at the documentary series Marvel 616, Episode 1 of Season 1, Japanese Spider-Man on TV Podcast Industries. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host, Derek. Ooh, this is a different one. We haven't done anything like this before, John.
No, this is documentary verse of Marvel. Yes, yeah. On Disney Plus, I hasten to add.
Yes. So I know Marvel 616, another term. It's a comic book term for the main universe of Marvel Comics. It's where all the main stuff takes place. There's loads of alternate universes, but Marvel 616 in the comic books is the central universe. What's Marvel 616 on Disney Plus, John?
Well, it's an 8-episode anthology documentary series, and it's exploring a variety, basically, of influences of the Marvel comics, both in culture, society, but also at Marvel as well. I think the interesting thing here is each episode is from a different perspective from the directors involved that have contributed to then these 8 episodes in the series. I think for me, I don't really know many of the directors, but certainly 2 of them really spring out to me. One being Gillian Jacobs, who played Britta on the awesome TV series Community, which I loved, Nerdville Centra.
Yeah.
And she really gives us a great, compelling history of the role and the determination of women in comics, and especially at Marvel. So really nice. I think we saw it at the San Diego Comic-Con online. There was kind of almost like a little behind the scenes bit of footage with Gillian Jacobs. Yes. So, it kind of really, that's where it sort of became a little interesting, to me. And certainly then, this is kind of maybe a first looking at a documentary anthology series as well for ourselves. But I think the important thing for us is that, if you fellow Defenders who are listening just want to watch the entire series or pop in and out of a few episodes, then I think, you can sit back over Christmas and put your feet up, have the old pooch by the fire, your Prosecco or champagne, maybe your whiskey or maybe just a beer, and you can relax, just listening to our, very, sort of festive bite-sized delve into these. This isn't going to be anything too long. It's really just to kind of give an overview of each of the episodes of this series.
Yes.
I think the other director that I kind of recognized was Paul Scheer.
Yes.
A writer, actor, and a podcaster. But he delivers a really interesting, almost meta documentary that is kind of a comedic spoof pilot pitch within a documentary episode.
Very good.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting as well.
Because he does the podcast, How Did This Get Made? Really good, really interesting podcast, or at least it started out as a really interesting podcast. So, interesting to see what Paul Scheer delivers on this show. And yeah, I absolutely love Gillian Jacobs. It can't be underestimated, her work on Community. She was hilarious on that show. But what's really important about Community, of course, is that's the show that gave us the Russo brothers, who delivered all of the Avengers movies and Captain America movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of them. Don't want to take away from Joss Whedon there. Delivered most of the Avengers movies and the Captain America movies. So Gillian being involved in that show and coming on board doing this directorial job on this show is really interesting. That so much has come from Community, because it seemed like that little show that could and just kept getting renewed under the radar. Really nerdy and really geeky audience, and really interesting to see on the other side of the camera, in front of the camera, all the people behind on the show itself were also pretty nerdy too. So
exactly.
That's really cool. And you can tell that.
Absolutely. And of course, for you podcast nerds of TV podcast industries, this is a big welcome back to fellow Defenders. We used to be Defenders TV podcast, along with Gotham TV podcast, but we're now bringing Defenders onto TV podcast industries. We've been on a bit of a hiatus since the final Marvel Netflix shows were wrapped up. And of course, we moved over to TV podcast industries, but we're back because we love covering Marvel.
Yep.
And, 2021 is going to see a nice big oomph back on Marvel TV, kicking off with WandaVision in January of 2021.
That's right.
So that is kind of another little kind of prelude to us getting back into the Marvel TV shows, of course, now on Disney Plus. And of course, if you're new to the podcast, then please, head on over to subscribe to the podcast at tvpodcastindustries.com. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or you can just search TV Podcast Industries on any good or evil podcast catcher of your choice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. If you're watching the documentary, pop us an email into feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com and let us know what you think of these shows. Hopefully you'll enjoy this little dive into the Marvel Comics documentary stuff. So it'll be interesting stuff. What are we talking about in this episode, John?
So the first episode is Japanese Spider-Man.
Awesome.
Which is just fascinating look at that cultural crossover that effectively took Spider-Man to Japan. It's Spider-Man with a Japanese twist. It is a really lovely, and I have to say I loved this tale of taking such a big Marvel property in the form of Spider-Man and making it for the Japanese audience.
I was really interested,
I mean, at the center of it is Gene Pelc, who effectively went over with his wife, who was Japanese, and began pitching around Marvel properties, comic properties, because they realized comics were massive in Japan, but Marvel comics weren't selling. And ultimately, he was given pretty much free rein to then come up with a way, I suppose, of commercializing Marvel more in Japan. Yeah. And it was through TV, and it was through the Japanese Spider-Man TV show. And I love it. There's no Aunt May. There's no Peter Parker. There are robots galore, because the way to get people into the TV shows at the time was through toys. And so it was, where's the toy going to be here? Exactly, other than just simply the action figure of Spider-Man. And so you have robots here.
Well, of course.
And dare I say it, actual stunts as well. There is a great little bit with the stunt coordinator and the stuntman, who are scathing about the Spider-Man film that was released much earlier in the 70s. So Japanese Spider-Man aired on the TV there between 1978 and 1979, and it stayed locked in Japan until 2009, when audiences outside of Japan could see it for the first time.
But there had always been rumours about it. It was always that show that, even in the early days of YouTube, I remember little clips of Japanese Spider-Man and everybody going, what is this? What's this show that has, as you say, no Aunt May, no storyline connected to the comic books? Like, I grew up, was born in the 70s. In the 80s, they did show the American version of Spider-Man TV show. And it was basically a guy with ropes who just threw the ropes and then maybe climbed around a bit. But this show seems to have some great stunts, and they were all actual, all practically done.
Well, that's it. So the stuntman, Harifuma Kojan, just talks of all the pain that he went through doing the actual stunts. So they had him going up buildings. They had him swinging between buildings, underneath suspension bridges, and the kickoff to the show was him climbing up the Tokyo Tower in the middle of Tokyo with no safety. He got something like 60 meters up, and you just hear him talk about it. He got bit by a dog on the arse. He was holding on to cars, no safety ropes. And the stunt coordinator is there saying, we wouldn't be able to do this now.
No way.
It wouldn't pass the health and safety. But it was all done because when they watched the American movie from the early 70s of Spider-Man, they said, but it's not like the comics that they were using to research. So, there's no low center of gravity. He's not crawling up the side of buildings. He's not jumping onto ceilings. He's not swinging and doing all this action stuff. So I thought this was really, really fascinating. And the stunt coordinator with the stuntman who did the stunts in the spider outfit are just really, really interesting.
They are, aren't they? Yeah, definitely the one that stood out to me was just the actual stance that the stuntman created for Spider-Man, where he was kind of looking at spiders and taking inspiration from them about how they would stand if they were in a human body. And it looks completely different from anything we've seen on the Western versions of Spider-Man. Even the Tom Holland movies, they don't really have that version of Spider-Man. This is a totally new style and look at it, because they're taking so little from the comics and so little from American TV or American movies. They're kind of able to create whatever they wanted to, which is so interesting.
Well, it is. I mean, they had to keep Spider-Man looking like Spider-Man, but then all the bad guys were sort of drawn from Japanese mythology, and they were all new. And then you had this addition, which again is another really fascinating part of this, the addition of robots. So TOEI company was involved, and the guy who designed one of the robots, he said, well, no one really said no. Yeah. So he designed something that looked like a sphinx and transformed effectively into a leopard called Leopardon. And there was
like, why not? You know, of course, you might as well throw in a sphinx there.
There was the
what
Marveler.
Connection would there be with Spider-Man and the sphinx? Maybe Moon Knight might have a sphinx connection.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe not
But
Spider-Man.
and then the Marveler, and these were all really to be able to sell toys on the back of the TV show.
Yep.
But the really interesting thing here was that it transformed from a spaceship with a sphinx on it into Leopardon, and this ultimately led after that to a comic series called Shogun Warriors.
Oh yeah,
that then led on to Transformers.
Of course,
and so. Actually, he wanted the robots to transform, and he was thinking of the American English to use for it. And so, he said transform, and then ultimately, in the evolution of this, it went from Shogun Warriors to Transformers, which is really interesting that, you know, Transformers came out of this. Yeah. I suppose ultimately along with Power Rangers. So a lot of cultural references coming in from this one guy, Gene Pelc, being given free reign.
Yeah.
And ultimately something that when he showed the first cut of it, the corporate heads in Marvel were just like, didn't get it. Yeah. You know, and that's why it remained sort of cordoned off in Japan. They didn't like it, but luckily, Stan Lee did love it.
Yes,
he really enjoyed that they had done the Japanese twist to Spider-Man and made it digestible and
for the audience.
And for the audience in Japan. And
like what people always forget about Stan Lee is that he was a PR man, he was a marketing man as well as being a comic book writer. And what he always was there for us, give the audience what they want. He's kind of different from the Apple heads, you know, where their idea is they don't even know what they want. We'll give them something and they'll want it anyway. Whereas Stan Lee is like, you want to entertain them, and if they want to be entertained, give them exactly something that's going to entertain them and show them what they want. So he always was very appreciative of creative people, because making something creatively for the audience that you're aiming for and doing it well is something they always loved. So I really like that. And you're right, that whole idea of Gene Pelc, this concept of him traveling back and forth with his girlfriend, I think at the time, who's Japanese, now his wife, but traveling back and forth to Japan and going, maybe I can call up Marvel and see if I can get their stuff over here. He wasn't even working for Marvel. He just was calling them up with an idea.
I think they say he was a Marvel representative.
But he was calling them up just trying to get, maybe we can sell the products over here, which I thought was fascinating. So.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily as well, the Japanese audience loved it. I mean, there's a really nice interview with the actor who played Spider-Man out of costume, Shinji Tôdô, who brought like a completely different perspective. So he talks about how he, you know, wanted to kind of keep the humanity of him. And so you'd see in the spider suit him sneezing because he had allergies, for example, which was really interesting. Yeah. And I think that ultimately, you know, it's a show that had heart and soul, and it was about always trying to do your best. And that's what connected it. I think, it kept the spirit of Spider-Man and had the angle of making it popular for the Japanese market. And out of that, a whole host of other different ideas flourished, and came to pass, whether that was Transformers or it influenced other programs like Power Rangers. And so I thought this was, I just thought this was really, really, a great little opener for this series with Japanese Spider-Man and seeing that cultural crossover, and bringing it to the Japanese audience. So it's definitely one that I would recommend, to watch, because it is just so out there. I mean, I think the great thing is, I think one of the corporate, members of Marvel just said, this is not Spider-Man, this is crazy stuff, because you look at it, it looks crazy. And it was done on a shoestring as well. Absolutely so tight on budget. And they kind of go into that a bit with this really nice look at how they take one of the robots transforming, withdrawing its sword, chucking it through the air and just hitting a different enemy each time. So they just replace the enemy. 5 or 6
different episodes just using the same piece of footage.
It's actually a really nice, little opener for this series.
And a really unusual one as well, though, isn't it? Like, taking that story of Japanese Spider-Man, it's a really unusual idea to do it that way, rather than, taking something, something like translating comic books into TV, or something really punchy, something that people will jump on board instantly. Because a lot of people haven't even heard of Japanese Spider-Man. So you're flicking through the documentaries on Disney Plus and you're going, what the heck is this about?
Yeah.
So it's aimed at a certain type of person who may have known about it, but it's an interesting story. And the one thing that I'd like to add at the end of this, the one thing that I really liked about it was when they're talking to Shinji Tôdô, about his role in the show as Spider-Man out of the suit, when they're talking to him, he seems genuinely affected by the idea that this is still a memory for a lot of people, that people still are inspired by his work, and the stuntman saying the same thing. He's really proud of what he's done. The actress who played the love interest on the show, or the sisterly kind of figure on the show, because they said there was never really a love interest in the show, but her saying how proud she is of the work that she did all those years ago to still be remembered 40 odd years on. I think it's a lovely moment, and it's quite touching towards the end of
it. It is. It's a real nice nostalgic look at TV shows from the 70s that really, for the time tried to push the boundaries. I mean, as a Doctor Who fan as well, you see some of the puppets and you're kind of like going, okay, you see some of the edits to people falling off cliffs where it's obviously on a model, but it's like, that's what they had at that time. Exactly. And for TV, I mean, it's come a long way, but there's something heartwarming to see that, all these different steps push through. And I think just to finish, I think when Gene Pelc first started to look to see why Marvel wasn't, the comics weren't working for the Japanese market, he really found a very, interesting take, because obviously manga was huge and is huge in Japan. So the Japanese absolutely loved their comics. And he said, but it was so visual. Hardly any writing or dialogue. It was visual storytelling, in quite a purer sense compared to Marvel, where he said there's all these text bubbles and speech bubbles that, you're going through, but still, there's the artwork behind it there. And he said that was one of the main things that they, in sort of then bringing it to the TV, to make it that the entry point for, Japan was to give it visually on the TV. Fascinating episode, and certainly I would recommend it for sure.
Excellent stuff. Yes, a really good opener for Marvel 616.
Absolutely, for sure. Thanks so much, fellow Defenders, for joining us. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on any podcast catcher of your choice, or head on over to TV Podcast Industries. You can also support us by subscribing to our Patreon over at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. It's really great being back in the world of Marvel TV, even if it is in a documentary sense, with the Defenders. And of course, we will be back for the next episode of Marvel 616 for episode 2, Higher, Further, Faster. And of course, from January 15th, 2021, with our coverage and discussion of WandaVision.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep defending.
Bye.
Bye.